All right, I want to welcome everyone here to the rental licensing webinar series. This is another series that we're putting on to help inform you about different codes in the city of Hagerstown, particularly when they relate to the property maintenance code. This is being put on by the Planning and Code Administration Department. And what we're going to do is just kind of walk you through the technical aspects of just one particular code item each part of this series here. And this is not a full comprehensive review. When I want to understand that, we're just going over the most common situations that we typically come across in our office. We always want you to consult with our office if you had any questions related to your project. We don't want you to use this webinar as a way to move forward with something that you heard today and you're like, oh, I need to take care of that. If there is something along those lines, please just call our office. We're just trying to make you more aware of a particular situation. To ask any questions, depending on how you have your Zoom set up, you can either tap on the bottom of the screen or click and tap on the Q&A button where you can submit your question and be able to answer them as time allows at the end. Today, what we're going to do is walk you through the technical aspects of a means of egress or emergency escape. What is required? We get these questions a lot, so we thought let's do a part of this series. Donnie, who you can probably see on the screen, he is going to be leading you through this part today. Donnie, he is certified as a property maintenance inspector with the city of Hagerstown, and we're going to have some screen sharing for you so you can see things as Donnie walks through. So I'm going to share a screen, and Donnie, I'm going to turn things over to you.
All right, thank you, Paul. So as Paul mentioned, my name is Donnie Harkcom. I'm a neighborhood services inspector for the city of Hagerstown, and I've been an inspector for over 3 years. And as Paul mentioned, we're going to be discussing emergency escape and means of egress throughout this webinar. So first, let's get an understanding of what each term means. These definitions are the same in the property maintenance code, the building code, the residential code, and the fire codes. So an emergency escape and rescue opening is an operable window, door, or similar device that provides for a mean of escape and access for rescue in the event of an emergency. So the purpose for an emergency escape window is because a lot of fatal fires occur while people are asleep. The reasons for the increased hazard is because people often have the delayed reactions once they notice a fire. They're usually waking up from sleep and they can be temporarily confused. The rooms are dark and usually the occupants are in their bed clothing. And all of these circumstances reduce the reaction time of the occupants and increase the likelihood of compromising their ability to exit a building. And a means of egress is a continuous and unobstructed path of vertical and horizontal egress travel from any occupied point of a building or structure to a public way. And the fire code goes a bit further with this definition, stating that the means of egress consists of 3 separate and distinct parts. The first one is the exit access, the second is the exit, and the third, the exit discharge. And note that a public way is a street, alley, or other parcel of land open to the outside, air leading to a street. And before we dive into the code requirements, when were these codes established? So means of egress has been around for some time in Hagerstown. The earliest code earliest code book we have on file in our office is the official building code of the city of Hagerstown, Maryland, 1927 edition. This edition has a section devoted towards means of egress. And this code could have existed before, but our library of code books currently goes back to 1927. And there are 10 subsections under the means of egress umbrella of what a building is required to have if over 1 story in height. And as a side note, when you flip through these books, and as you can see in the PowerPoint, there are ads from local businesses in the book. So this is a trip down memory lane when you're looking up codes in this book. And emergency escape windows do not have as long of a history in these code books. The first mention of an emergency escape window in our code library was in the 1979 1 and 2 family dwelling code book. And our research for this webinar indicated that the escape window code first appeared in a code book in 1964. And the first mention of emergency escape windows in the property maintenance code for the city of Hagerstown was in 1990, which is for existing structures. So that's a little bit of history on emergency escapes and means of egress. And now we're going to dive into the codes currently adopted. So first, let's examine the means of egress. When is a means of egress required? Well, every structure is to have a means of egress out of the unit. The main question for this discussion is, when is a second means of egress required? A unit that is located above the second floor or a third floor and above unit requires two means of egress. And this comes from section 702.3 of the Property Maintenance Code. In diving further into the number of exits required, what are considered two exits? All occupants are to have access to at least two independent exits. And what we mean by independent is that there is to be two ways out of the unit. And there are a couple of ways to achieve this requirement. The most common way of obtaining two independent exits is to construct a second means of egress on the exterior of the structure. And this is most common because most of the structures in Hagerstown with third floor and above apartment units were not originally constructed with a third floor unit. If they were, they have an existing second means of egress. And remember, this has been in Hagerstown's code for approximately 100 years. The other way is two independent exits on the interior of the structure. So if we look at some of our larger buildings in Hagerstown, such as Elizabeth Court or the Alexander House, these structures do not have exterior means of egress, and each unit does not have a door to the exterior. And this is because the corridor in the hallway is a fire-rated corridor. The unit exits into the corridor or hallway, and the occupant then has two ways to exit out of the corridor. The majority of our third floor and above units that were converted years later did not have these two internal means of egress. Over the years, these second means of egress were added. Unfortunately, some of these units still do not have a second means of egress. So you need to have a second means of egress from your third floor and above unit. How do you construct one? For this purpose, we're going to talk about a new one on the exterior. The new means of egress will have to meet the currently adopted International Building Code, and this is currently in its 2018 edition. So why the International Building Code and not the Residential Code? Well, the Residential Code only covers 1 and 2 family dwellings. Since this is a third floor unit, most likely is 3 units or more structure. The IBC is the code for 3 or more unit structures. The building code requires the means of egress is to have treads at least 11 inches deep and risers no higher than 7 inches. There are to be landings when the height is more than 12 feet on the risers. The code requires an exit out of the unit to the means of egress, which is to be a door. We have allowed on rare occasions in the past the use of an emergency escape window in lieu of a door, but this has to be approved by the chief code official and the fire marshal. And these are a case-by-case basis. And there can be other requirements for a new means of egress, or if you have to replace one due to deterioration. A building permit is required for the construction of a new means of egress or replacement of one. And once you apply, the plans will be reviewed and comments will be provided by the reviewer. Please be sure to always review the comments provided because there may be changes you have to make to meet the code. So what about existing second means of egress? Now, these are great if you already have one, and it certainly saves some cost. The existing egress path is to be safe, continuous, and have an unobstructed path of travel from any point in a building or structure to a public way. These need to have a path all the way to a public way. They are not to stop at a second floor, and they must go all the way to the ground. And we have had them stop at the second floor or on a roof, but the stairs must go all the way to the ground to a public way. The exits from a dwelling unit are not to go through other units or through a toilet room or bathroom. I know that sounds kind of unbelievable, but we have come across that before. These egress paths are not permitted. The means of egress stairs, exterior and interior, are to have at least one handrail on one side of the stairs. On any open portion of the stairs, there are to be guards with an opening no more than 4-inch spacing. And the exiting means of egress are to be illuminated of not less than 1 foot candle. And lastly, on a means of egress, there's to be a safe path to the ground, and this includes the egress path across a roof. And there's to be a cattle chute or a walkway to guide the occupants across the roof to the stairs. Another option is to have guards around the entire roof edge. These types of roof egress paths can create confusion in the event of an emergency. People become disoriented, and without the proper safeguards in place, could take the wrong turn. The guards or cattle chute protects people when egressing from the structure to safely make their way to the stairs across the roof. This is required for all new and existing structures. And this goes back to what we talked about in the beginning when people are disoriented. If you're going onto the roof for the first time since living in a building, that cattle chute will be a good protection to get you across safely. All right, so hopefully you have a better understanding of when a second means of egress is required. And now we're going to discuss an emergency escape. And as we mentioned earlier in the webinar, an emergency escape window was first required in new construction in the 1960s and was then added to the Property Maintenance Code in 1990. And we're asked at times, aren't things like this grandfathered in the code? Well, the Property Maintenance Code is the minimum standard, or you could call it a grandfathered code. The code takes into account how construction has evolved over the years, while also establishing minimum standards where studies have shown this is the standard needed to save lives. We're not going to deny that this can be difficult to achieve, but if one life is saved, it is worth the investment. So when are they required? Every sleeping room located at or below the third story in a residential structure shall have at least one openable window or exterior door for emergency escape or two independent exits. The independent exits being the means of egress we just mentioned. And there is an exemption to the code requirement for an emergency escape window, and that is if the building is equipped throughout with an approved automatic fire suppression system. And now that we know these emergency escapes are required pretty much in a majority of homes in Hagerstown, what size do they have to be? The minimum dimension for an escape window is to have a clear opening of 24 inches. The minimum clear opening width is to be 20 inches. A requirement for all emergency escape windows is that all window sills cannot be higher than 44 inches above the floor surface. And this is for all levels in a unit. So what does the overall square footage for a window have to be? The clear opening is to be 5.7 square feet for windows on the second, third, and basement sleeping room. And you can see in this diagram how you can obtain the 5.7 square feet with those specific measurements. The clear opening for a ground level or first floor window is 5 square feet. And some of you may be thinking, I don't have a window that large to meet that code requirement. What do I have to do? The one thing our code does take into consideration is the age of the home. At the time of construction, a smaller window may have met the code. And as we mentioned with the building code from 1927, the same is in place for windows. The older code may permit a smaller window than we just mentioned. The code official performing the inspection will evaluate the situation to determine if an emergency escape window is required. And as I'm sure many of you can recall, we are typically not requiring an emergency escape window on the second floor of a residential unit. The windows come into play with basement units or bedrooms and third floor bedrooms. And as mentioned earlier, the third floor bedrooms or units were typically not part of the original construction of the structure. This is the same for basement units or bedrooms. These were added later and oftentimes without permits. And this is when the currently adopted code has to be met for the escape windows, which is the 5.7 square feet. If you need to install an emergency escape window, a building permit may be needed for the installation. And let's first talk about a third floor bedroom. When a third floor bedroom requires an emergency escape window, a permit is not always required. If the entire window opening is large enough, but is not a casement window, then the replacement of the window with a casement does not require a permit for this replacement. A side note is if the property is located in a historic district, then you must have HDC approval prior to performing the replacement, and there is no fee for this review. If you do not have a large enough window opening, take a look at the header. If it is large enough to support the exterior wall and roof above, then you might be able to make a larger opening without a permit. I would recommend contacting our building inspector before proceeding using the existing header. If the window meets the width requirement of 20 inches clear opening, then maybe you could go down to make a larger window. This too would not require a permit. One thing to be aware of is if the bottom of the window is within 18 inches of the floor, then the window will have to have tempered glass, meaning that it won't shatter if someone falls into it. And this is a Maryland safety class law requirement. And most of the third floor bedrooms have the typical small attic window. When this is the case, an emergency escape window building permit would be required. All right, so let's talk about a basement sleeping room. A building permit is more likely to be required. Just the same as the attic, if the window opening is large enough already, a permit is not required to replace the window. If the opening needs to be expanded, then a permit is required. Even if you are able to create a larger opening by going below the existing window, a permit is still required. So you might be asking, why is a permit required when you go down in a basement? Well, there's several factors, and this is typically because of the foundation wall. Larger openings have to be evaluated and inspected. Also, the larger window may require a window well if you are going below grade. Window wells have a minimum requirement. Basically, the window well has to be 9 square feet, 3 foot by 3 foot. All right, so to sum up what we covered in this webinar so far, a means of egress and emergency escape windows are required in every structure. They are required because in the event of an emergency, occupants need to get out of the structure as safely as possible. And whenever you have a situation and do not know if it meets code, please contact our office. We are happy to come out and assist you with the determination and help you through the permit process. So now we'll go back to Paul and go over any questions that we may have received.
Okay, thank you, Donnie, for going over those items. And I think we're all aware that Donnie probably didn't cover everything that we could come across in the city of Hagerstown. Just for everyone's knowledge, the photos that were included with the slideshow are actual properties here in Hagerstown. They weren't just Google type pictures. They were all things from here in Hagerstown that Donnie actually took himself for us. So that is something that was something to make you aware of, that they're all local requirement or local pictures. Now, as we know, Donnie covered a lot of generalities with emergency escapes or means of egress, and we know that Hagerstown's a very unique town. There's things that might not be the exact same for every scenario. Everything's a case-by-case basis, so I want to make sure everyone's aware that there might be an additional requirement versus something that we covered here today. You know, our goal is just kind of give you a general overview of this particular code, like we're talking about with the means of egress or the emergency escape. Now, if you have any specific questions related to your property, certainly you can always email us at codecompliance@hagerstownmd.org, and we'll be able to answer those questions. Now we're going to kind of have some questions filter in through our Q&A. So again, if you have any questions, certainly just click or tap that Q&A button, and we'll be able to answer those as time allows. Like our goal is always trying to keep these around 15 to 20 minutes, since we're going a little bit more technical, as we understand there might be additional questions. What I'm going to go over is a couple questions that we generally get that maybe can answer some of them that if you might be thinking about. So Donnie, at times when we go to these places and there isn't a means of egress from a third floor property, people ask, you know, can I just use one of those roll up ladders and just use that so that people can get out of the window that way?
Right, and while that is a good intention, no, our code does not permit the use of ladders as a means of egress, and they are sold, you know, as a means of escape from a home. There are no codes supporting these types of ladders as a means of egress.
All right, and one of the other questions that we get, or someone might be thinking about, is that I have a second floor unit, but it also utilizes the third floor of the structure. So I enter in on the second floor of the property. I might have a kitchen and a living room and maybe a bathroom on that level. But on the third floor of the property, I have 2 bedrooms. Do I need to make a means of egress for that third floor bedroom out of that place?
No, a second means of egress is only required when the entire unit is on the third floor or above. You may be exempted from a second means of egress, but still meet the escape window requirements.
Okay. And then now I know that, we have double hung windows. That's pretty much the common that we see in most residential structures here. But they have tilt out sashes. Doesn't that just kind of meet the requirements there of emergency escape there? Because they can tilt the whole window out, they can pull it all the way out. Doesn't that just mean an emergency escape?
And, that's another misconception. No, double hung windows do not meet the definition of an emergency escape. When a window is opened with normal operations, the clear opening is to be 5.7 square feet.
Okay. And then one last one that we get a lot of times, that I have a window but my sill height is more than 44 inches off of the floor. I know I've seen these several times and get to ask this question. Can I just build stairs up to that window so then people can just climb on out?
These are a case-by-case basis. Our chief code official can grant the use of stairs, but this has been rare and only when extreme practical difficulties are in place. Just the fact that the cost is lower, the cost of lowering the window, it's not a difficulty per se.
Okay. So we still have to lower it, even it might cost a little bit more money.
Correct.
All right, so we have had a couple questions come in here. One person asked, we're trying to take notes and hoping that we could slow down a little bit. The one thing I want to make everyone aware is that we are recording these. They will be posted on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to view them at any given time. If you do have questions after you're viewing those, please do not hesitate to contact our office. We can certainly answer any questions that you may have. One question that we have in here, Donnie, is that, what is the process to have the building inspector see a third floor unit?
Mainly calling into our office and either speaking with them directly or scheduling an inspection to have them come out, and maybe you can expand on that too, on more of a process, and we can get them that information so they always have it.
Right. Yeah. So like Donnie kind of said there, yeah, it's certainly, if it's one of those things, we can, if you're looking at using the existing header and you have it exposed, we can have a building inspector come out and meet you. If it is just something evaluating the third floor of a property, determining whether or not you would need a particular requirement we mentioned today, you can just contact our office. The inspector for that area will certainly come out and conduct like a walkthrough evaluation to let you know what's needed. The one question we have here as well, do you need to have a contractor present when the building inspector comes on the premise?
I know it'd be helpful if there were certain questions to be asked from the building inspector at the time to know if there's any corrections that need to be made. Maybe you can expand on that one a little bit further if it's required.
Yeah, like Donnie said, it's not really required. We can certainly just meet the homeowner out at the property and go from there. And when we're looking at when a permit's getting involved and you want to have maybe a pre-construction type meeting, that's something that we could arrange with the contractor, the one that's actually performing the work. But just for a general discussion, the contractor does not need to be there. You don't even have to have one in mind at that point. You could just be meeting with us to know if you need a contractor to do the work. And I think that might be it. I'm trying to see some, I have a question, but then it says that we think we already answered their question. So, let me just double check here. So if you meet the minimum requirement for an egress for an attic with the window that meets the code and opens onto the roof and a staircase from the roof below, that's my next step to declare it as an extra bedroom. I could take this one, Donnie. I think I might be understanding what they're going at there. So, one that we are going to have later to finish off this series is going to be, I have a third floor attic area and I want to convert it into a bedroom. How can I make that into another bedroom? And that is something that we'll be covering later in the series, and we'll be able to answer maybe more detail and explain certain requirements. There are different things that come into play than just the means of egress or an emergency escape window when you want to look at converting that attic into a bedroom. It all depends on how that second floor is laid out as well. when you're creating that bedroom for the third floor, you might be eliminating one on the second floor, depending on how the structure was constructed. And that's something we'll get into detail at another time there. But certainly it is something that we do get frequently asked, and that will be the last of one in our series here the week before Thanksgiving that we'll be answering or kind of giving more details about that, creating that third floor bedroom. And so that looks like, Donnie, that might be all of our questions here. I appreciate everyone here. We always try to keep these short, like we said. If you do have any questions that is coming up after viewing this later, certainly just email us at codecompliance@hagerstownmd.org, and we'll be able to answer any of your questions that way. Also, if you're curious about different things that are going on in Hagerstown, please follow us on social media. It's PCAD Hagerstown, and that's PCAD Hagerstown. That you can search for us on any of the platforms of Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, where we were attempting to stream live today, but didn't succeed. So we will hopefully do that next time. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining this webinar today, and we will look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.